Have you ever looked at your life and wondered, why am I working so hard and still have nothing to show for it? One fall evening, in a small apartment on the edge of the city, a young woman sat at her kitchen table, her hands trembling as she held a red pen. She had just finished writing her very first household budget, and the numbers on the page nearly made her cry. Total debt, over $113,000, credit cards, student loans, a car payment, all of it pressing down on her and her newlywed husband just weeks after moving to a new state, hoping to start fresh. But the real problem wasn't just the debt. The real problem was they were short $200 every month just to survive. He was in an unpaid internship. She was working full-time and still couldn't make ends meet.
"I didn't understand how we got here," she later shared. "But I knew one thing, we couldn't keep living like this, not one more day."
And then, one small decision. One seemingly random choice. It opened the door to a long, painful, but hopeful journey, paying off every dollar of that debt in just 28 months. No miracle, no family bailout, no shortcuts, just grit, sacrifice, and a plan. In today's video, you'll follow that entire journey, and more importantly, discover simple financial lessons that could change your life.
If you're feeling trapped in debt, did you know nearly 60% of Americans can't cover a $1,000 emergency without borrowing money? Not because they're lazy, but because they
never had a clear financial plan. They were just an ordinary couple, like millions of others starting married life in America. 2 years earlier, they had moved from a small southern town to the suburbs near Washington, D.C., carrying with them hopes of a new beginning, steady jobs, a warm little apartment, and a financially secure future. But just a few weeks after settling in, they started to feel something wasn't right. Bills kept stacking up. Credit card alerts wouldn't stop. A few payments came in late. Then, break. Time 300 degrees. They sat down to do the one thing nobody really wants to do. They totaled up all their debt. The final number? $113,000. Here's the breakdown. Almost $75,000 in student loans, 2 bachelor's degrees, $16,000 for a car loan, and roughly $22,000 in credit card debt, mostly from essential expenses during school and their recent move. And no, they weren't reckless with money, no yearly iPhone upgrades, no weekend shopping sprees, no fancy vacations. They simply fell into debt because they'd never truly learned how to manage cash flow. "We worked so hard," the wife later recalled, "but by the end of every month we still didn't know where the money went." The truth? No budget, no emergency fund, no plan. Just the hope that somehow things would work themselves out. And that's where so many young people find themselves, because we're not taught personal finance in school. No one tells us how much rent is too much, which debt to pay off first, or how to prepare for the unexpected. Then life picks up speed, bill after bill, swipe after swipe, until one day you wake up and realize you're drowning. So what's the real lesson here? It's not that you're spending too much, it's that you don't really know where your money is going. This couple thought they were fine until that $113,000 number stared back at them. And at that point, they had 2 choices: keep avoiding it or begin to change. That night, something resurfaced in her memory. A voice from a financial radio show she used to hear in her dad's car as a kid. She didn't remember all the details, but she remembered how calm, how direct that voice sounded. One line stood out: "If you keep living like this, where will you be next year?" That question haunted her. The next morning, over coffee, They opened YouTube, searched for that old episode, and listened to the full 45-minute show.
All the way through. It was a small moment, but it lit a spark, a light in the darkness. And from that moment on, they stepped into a journey that would last 28 months.
Full of sacrifice, setbacks, and small victories, but also transformation. So what did they do first? What debt did they tackle? And how did they stay committed for over 2 years? In part 2, the turning point, when financial theory becomes a life-saving plan. That night, after totaling up $113,000 in debt, she couldn't sleep. One question kept spinning in her mind. How did 2 educated people living modestly still end up in a financial crisis like this? She remembered something from childhood. Every time she rode in the car with her dad, he would play this financial advice radio show. She didn't remember everything it said, but the man's voice stuck with her. Calm,
Firm,
certain. And he always repeated one line: control every dollar you earn, or it will control you. The next morning, while making coffee, she reopened one of his old podcast episodes. This time, she didn't just listen in the background, she took notes, line by line. That afternoon, she downloaded an audiobook everyone kept recommending, The Debt-Free Plan, and within 24 hours, she had listened to the entire thing. That evening, she laid everything out on the table: utility bills, credit card statements, car loan papers, even household items they no longer used. "We need to start over," she said. "From scratch, no more borrowing."
no more random spending, and most importantly, we have to pay off debt in the right order. They began with something called the debt snowball method.
Instead of tackling the highest interest loan first, they paid off the smallest one, to create early wins and momentum like a snowball rolling downhill, growing bigger with every rotation.
Their first target?
A $120 old retail account. They paid it off completely on day 3 of their journey. And you know what? They felt victorious. It was just $120, but the feeling of eliminating even one tiny debt, it brought a whole new sense of energy. It made them believe they were finally doing something that worked. They looked around their apartment and realized how many things they owned, but didn't use. A bulky desk taking up the entire living room corner, 2 thick winter coats never worn, a wedding gift blender still sealed in the box. That night, she created a used items account on Facebook Marketplace. By the end of the first week, they had made nearly $300. Not enough to erase big debts, but enough to knock out several small ones. So, what's the real lesson here? Big change often starts with the smallest decision, to sit down and face the truth. They didn't wait to earn more. They didn't wait for things to calm down next month. They started right where they were, and slowly, step by step, they turned financial chaos into a survival strategy. No miracles, no handouts, no rescue. Just 2 people, 1 decision, and a handwritten budget on a kitchen table, and this was just the warm-up. In the next chapter, you'll witness the toughest stretch of their journey, when the big debts arrive and real sacrifices begin to show. After wiping out a few small debts in the first month, they started to feel a flicker of hope. But then, the heavy hitters began to show up, and the journey was no longer light. Their total credit card debt, nearly $22,000, 3 major cards, 1 for daily living, 1 for furniture from 2 years ago, and 1 they used back in college just to get by. High interest rates, heavy mental stress. And the minimum payments alone? Almost an entire week of the wife's paycheck. "Every time I looked at the statement," she said, "I saw numbers growing. even though we were trying to chip away at them. And then life began to test their resolve. They were living in an old apartment near the city centre, where rent ate up nearly 40% of their income. After many nights of discussion, they made a tough call. They moved to a quieter neighborhood further out, saving nearly $300 per month. On top of that, the husband was commuting nearly 50 miles each day, burning gas, wearing down the car, draining time and energy. The move helped lower both stress and expenses. But the hardest part wasn't the location. It was the lifestyle change. No more eating out, no more morning coffee runs, no more weekend treat-yourself splurges. Friends invited them to the movies. They declined. Co-workers asked to grab lunch. They brought food from home. Even on birthdays. They exchanged handwritten cards and took quiet walks through the park. Sometimes they argued. I remember one time we fought over a box of cereal. She laughed later. I wanted to get my favorite brand, but he said it wasn't in the budget. Sounds small, but when you're counting every dollar, those moments feel big. But ironically, those moments also helped them grow. They learned how to talk about money, something they used to avoid entirely. Midway through the journey, another challenge hit them. The husband's old car broke down and couldn't pass inspection in the new state. Repairing it was too expensive. Buying a new one? Out of the question. After a few days of thinking, they made a decision. Sell the car. They got nearly $6,000 from it and used most of it to wipe out a large credit card balance. No car meant he had to take the bus and walk, doubling his commute time, but saving both gas and debt. So what's the lesson here? Financial freedom doesn't come from easy choices, but from brave ones. Cutting out what everyone else does to walk a different path isn't always comfortable, but if your reason is strong enough, you'll find a way. And they had a powerful reason. We want a life without debt. We want to control our money, not let it control every decision we make. And after those grueling 14 months, for the first time, they saw a light at the end of the tunnel. In the next chapter, you'll see what happened when they entered the final sprint, where they threw over $4,000 a month toward their last debts. After more than a year of grinding through debt, sacrificing almost everything, something strange began to happen. They started to feel lighter. Not because the debt was gone. They still had about $18,000 left, including a car loan and some lingering consumer debt. But their mindset about money had changed completely. Each time they paid off a balance, big or small, it felt like pulling a boulder out of a backpack they'd carried for years. And just as they were running out of steam, things finally started to turn around. The wife got 2 pay raises in 6 months, each worth around $2 an hour. Her new job was more stable and less stressful. The husband? He was hired full-time after his internship and even picked up some evening shifts. At this point, their combined household income ranged from $68,000 to $95,000 a year. Not huge, but with careful planning, more than enough to make a final push. They made a bold decision. For 3 months straight, they would throw every extra dollar, after rent, food, insurance, toward debt. Each month, they paid nearly $4,000 on remaining balances. They called it the sprint phase. Because if they made it through this, they'd never have to start over again. No dining out, no Netflix, no weekend escapes or online shopping. They kept only the bare essentials. Everything else went toward their freedom. We didn't call it suffering, the wife once wrote anonymously on a personal blog. We called it purpose. For the first time, Every dollar we spent had direction, and every month we got closer to freedom. And then, at the end of month 28, they made the final payment. No more debt, no more payment reminders, no more anxiety every time they checked their bank account. They sat on the bare floor of their apartment, held each other, and cried in silence. No words needed. They both knew. They had just done something that most people thought was impossible. What's the small lesson here? Freedom doesn't come from having more money. It comes from no longer letting money control you. For 28 months, they paid an average of $4,000 a month on a modest income. No rich parents, no lottery wins, no miracles, just discipline, teamwork, and one handwritten budget reviewed every Sunday night. But becoming debt-free wasn't the finish line. In the next chapter, you'll discover the real tool that got them there. Not a book, not a podcast, but one small habit with life-changing power, proactive budgeting, and tracking every single dollar. When people hear this story, they often assume the couple must have used some secret formula or discovered a special investment strategy to pay off all that debt. But in reality, the most powerful tool they had wasn't money, it wasn't motivation either. It was a budget. The very first budget they created was back in September, right after realizing they owed $113,000. It was messy, scrawled on paper, full of scribbles and crossed out lines. They didn't know where to begin, how much they were spending, or how much they even should be spending. At the time, she later said in a financial support group, budgeting felt like a maze. Every time we cut one thing, something else popped up we'd forgotten. So they started simple, dividing expenses into 4 main categories: housing, food, transportation, and everything else. Then every month, on the last Sunday night, they sat down together and rewrote the budget for the new month. At first, it took them an hour or more, but after a few cycles, it became routine. One big shift came when they started using a budgeting app. They chose a free, simple one called Easy Track, a name we've changed for privacy. It let them split income into digital envelopes, assigning every single dollar a job. For example, $1,200 for rent, $400 for groceries, $100 for gas, $100 for miscellaneous. And whatever was left went straight to debt. Tracking every dollar in and out gave them control, instead of getting to the end of the month and wondering, where did it all go? A budget doesn't restrict your life, she wrote. It makes every choice feel clearer. And something unexpected happened. By budgeting regularly, they started to spot their spending habits and their weaknesses. The husband, for instance, had a habit of buying energy drinks from the gas station every morning, costing nearly $60 a month. The wife, she loved buying cute kitchen gadgets, most of which they didn't really need. The budget helped them see these things and fix them without fighting about it. So what's the small lesson here? Money doesn't disappear, it just isn't being tracked. And a budget isn't a cage, it's a map to freedom. After more than a year and a half of doing this, budgeting became like brushing their teeth. They couldn't imagine life without it. And even after their debt was gone, the budget stayed with them, like a trusted friend, a steady compass. In the next part, you'll see what happens once the debt is paid, and how they used that same foundation to begin a whole new chapter, saving, investing, and slowly building lasting financial freedom. On a quiet spring morning, nearly 3 years after starting their journey, they woke up to something entirely new. No more debt. No more payment reminders in their inbox. No more late-night stress over bills. No more dread when a text came in from the bank. It wasn't a feeling of overwhelming happiness, she later said. It was peace.
Like finally being able to breathe without that weight in your chest. But here's the truth. Reaching the finish line didn't mean life became perfect. Paying off debt was just the end of one chapter and the start of something new. The first thing they did after becoming debt-free.
They took a week off at home, not for a shopping spree, not for a vacation, but to rest, recharge, and ask each other one simple question. What do we want next in our
Lives? The answer was clear: safety and control. So they returned to their budget, but this time with new goals in mind. Build a 6-month emergency fund.
save for a home down payment, and for the first time, invest a small amount into long-term index funds? Nothing flashy, no crypto hype, no chasing hot stocks or jumping jobs for fast money, just consistency. Step by step, month by month, dollar by purposeful dollar. We didn't want to end up back where we started, they said, so every decision from now on must answer one question. Emphasis.
Level moderate. Does this bring us closer to freedom or pull us away from it?
A year later, they had a fully funded emergency fund, nearly enough for a small home down payment, and an investment account growing quietly in the background. But even more importantly, they were no longer the same people. The wife became more confident talking about money, no longer ashamed of her debt past. The husband learned how to communicate clearly about finances, instead of avoiding it like before. They didn't just pay off debt, they became a team. We used to argue over a bag of snacks, she laughed. Now we talk about money like we're planning a picnic. What's the small lesson here? Financial freedom isn't a number. It's the power to choose, instead of being chained to survival. It doesn't happen overnight, but each right choice today leads to a very different tomorrow. And now, with their journey behind them, there's one last thing they hope to share. For anyone standing at the foot of the same mountain, it doesn't matter where you're starting from. What matters is whether you take that first step. In the final part of this video, we'll summarize their full journey, pull out the key takeaways, and if you're in debt or in crisis, I'll show you the first steps you can take. Starting today, the journey you just heard wasn't about extraordinary people. They didn't win the lottery, they didn't have 6-figure salaries, they didn't get a big check from family. They were just two ordinary people, tired, overwhelmed, buried under more than $100,000 of debt, who chose to stand up, start over, and stay the course. They spent 28 months paying off every single dollar. But more than that, they spent every day of those 28 months rebuilding the way they lived. If you're watching this right now, feeling heavy with debt,
Lost in your finances, maybe you're standing at the same crossroads they once faced. Here's the truth. You don't have to fix it all today. You just have to start.
by reviewing your budget, cutting one small expense, or simply deciding not to look away anymore. Freedom doesn't mean life gets easy. It means you know you're heading in the right direction, and you don't have to walk it alone. I'd love to hear from you. Where are you in your financial journey? What's the first step you'll take after watching this video? And if this story resonated with you, please hit that subscribe button so you won't miss future videos where we share real stories, honest lessons, and the things few people talk
About when it comes to money, because everyone deserves a fair, healthy financial life, Ati, and it starts with you.